The studio was cold, not because of the air conditioning, but because of what everyone felt. Inside the ultra-modern International News Studio in London, glowing with vivid LED panels and buzzing with tension, two African giants sat across from each other. On one side, Nigerian President Bola Tinubu, calm, smiling, used to media games. On the other, Burkinabe Captain Ibrahim Traoré, focused, quiet, eyes scanning the room. The host tried to break the ice. Today we talk unity, progress, partnership between African leaders. But as the red live light blinked on, something shifted. Traoré's fingers clenched beneath the desk. The smile vanished from his face. He'd seen the document just hours earlier, a leaked diplomatic cable connecting Tinubu to a controversial weapons deal, meant to destabilize parts of the Sahel. He wasn't supposed to mention it. The producers had warned, keep it diplomatic. But when Tinubu leaned back, chuckled, and said smugly, Captain Traoré, with all due respect, some leaders talk big but deliver nothing. Traoré sat forward. The air cracked with silence. Then came the words that would make history. I'm sorry, Traoré said calmly. His voice was soft, too soft. But the studio froze. You want to talk about delivery? About results? Traoré asked, his accent firm, eyes locked on Tinubu's. Tinubu looked confused, then amused. He glanced at the host, expecting a light-hearted comeback. Instead, Traoré continued. You sit there in fine suits, while children in northern Nigeria dig through trash for food. You sign deals with foreign companies, while your people can't afford bread. You lie to the world. You lie to your people. Gasps rippled across the room. Then Traoré dropped the hammer. You are a liar, a fraud, and a criminal. The studio shattered in silence. One of the cameramen stepped back. An assistant producer dropped her earpiece. The host tried to speak, but no sound came out. Tinubu's face drained of color. This isn't politics anymore, Traoré added. This is personal. People are dying. Africa is bleeding. And leaders like you are selling our future for profit. Millions watched in disbelief as Traoré leaned back in his chair. He wasn't done, not even close. Tinubu didn't speak. He couldn't. For the first time in his long political career, the words weren't coming. His fingers tapped nervously against the table, trying to pretend he wasn't shaken. But his eyes betrayed him. They darted left, right, then down. He wasn't in control anymore. The host tried to redirect. Captain Traoré, perhaps we should... No, Traoré cut in, calmly, coldly. We will not move on, not until we tell the truth. A huge screen behind them suddenly flashed an image. Traoré's team had uploaded it seconds earlier. It showed a U.S. financial transaction from a private Nigerian account, traced directly to a European arms company. The audience watching live around the world held their breath. This money, Traoré said, pointing at the screen, was supposed to feed internally displaced families. Instead, it funded conflict, chaos. A tear formed in the eyes of a woman in the live audience. Someone whispered, "Is this real?" Traoré's voice dropped again. It is time we stop covering for corruption, even if it's painful, even if it's live. The truth was out now. There was no turning back. Tinubu's lips twitched, but no sound came out. Around the studio, nobody moved. A producer behind the cameras whispered, "Cut the feed." But it was too late. Over 12 million people were already watching across Africa, Europe, and the US on satellite and live stream. Captain Traoré adjusted his microphone. In 2018, over 80 schoolgirls disappeared in Zamfara, he said. Your government said it was terrorists, but this, he held up a red folder. This is proof that it was orchestrated by people close to you. For money. For power. Tinubu shook his head slowly. as if trying to wake from a nightmare. Traoré opened the folder, revealing documents, signatures, names. A woman in the studio audience let out a sob, the kind that comes from a wound too deep for words. The host looked ready to cry. "Mr. President," Traoré said, "I am a soldier. I've buried children. I've walked through villages where no one survived. You wear suits. I wear blood." It wasn't just a takedown anymore. It was a funeral for trust, and Tinubu was the one being buried. From the back of the studio came a faint sound. "Tell them," a voice whispered. Traoré paused. His eyes scanned the audience and found a woman standing, holding a framed photo. She looked older, maybe in her 60s, dressed in deep purple. She raised the photo. "My son. He died in Kaduna," she said, tears running down her cheeks. "Your Excellency Tinubu, you promised us justice, but nothing came." Her voice cracked, but she didn't stop. "You sent men to shake our hands. They gave us plastic bags of rice and 2,000 naira. Then they left. My son's blood still cries." The room shook, not from noise, but from truth. Even the host began to wipe tears away. Traoré stood up slowly and walked toward the woman. Cameras followed every step. He took the photo from her hands, raised it toward the lights, and said, "We cannot keep burying our children and praising the people who killed them." Then he turned back to Tinubu. "Mr. President, how many more must die before your silence becomes a crime?" The world was watching, and Africa's buried pain was finally being spoken aloud. Tinubu's voice finally cracked, but it wasn't words. It was breath, a gasp. His hands trembled as he reached for a glass of water. The host tried to help, but Tinubu waved him off. Then slowly he spoke, his voice dry, trembling. "I did what I thought was best for Nigeria." Traoré shook his head. "No, you did what was best for yourself." "Captain Traoré," Tinubu tried again, "you are young. You don't understand how hard leadership is." Traoré stepped forward. "You're right. I'm young. But I've slept on bare ground with my soldiers. I've shared cassava with orphans. I've walked through villages burned to ash. You fly over them in jets. Don't speak to me about hard." There was a silence that felt heavier than stone. Traoré then turned to the camera. "To the mothers watching. To the fathers who have nothing but prayer. I see you. We will not be silent anymore." In the control room, the lead producer whispered, "This is no longer an interview. This is history." And still, Traoré hadn't revealed the final document, the one that would change everything. The screen behind them changed again. This time, Traoré's team displayed the image of a dusty village, barely standing. Charred buildings, empty water buckets, silence captured in pixels. "That's Tambuwal," Traoré said. "Burned down, 47 killed. 23 of them were under the age of 10. Tinubu looked away. Traoré's voice softened. "Mr. President, I know what your security chief sent to you that day. I have a copy. They said it was not serious, just another ethnic clash, but it wasn't. It was a massacre." He paused, then added, "You flew to Paris the next morning." A murmur spread through the studio. Some couldn't hold back their tears anymore. One of the makeup artists in the corner covered her mouth, sobbing. Then came the most painful part. Traoré pulled out a blood-stained drawing. "A child gave me this before he died. He said, 'Tell them we were just children.'" Silence again. That drawing, clutched by tiny fingers saved by a soldier, now held on live television, hit harder than any speech. And for the first time, even Tinubu looked shaken. He wasn't facing a politician. He was facing truth. From his jacket pocket, Traoré carefully pulled out a folded envelope. "The mother who gave me this," he said, "asked me to read it when I met you." He opened the letter and read, eyes steady, voice gentle. My name is Amina. I lost my husband to terrorists. Then I lost my first son to hunger. My second son was taken by gunmen. I have one daughter left. She is all I have. Mr. President, why do your friends drive big cars while we bury our babies in the sand? The camera zoomed in on Tinubu's face. He blinked quickly, trying to hold back emotion, or maybe rage. No one could tell. Traoré folded the letter. I promised her you would hear those words. The host turned to Tinubu. Mr. President, would you like to respond? Tinubu looked into the camera, then at the table, then back to Traoré. But again, he said nothing. Traoré whispered, You don't have to say anything. The people already know. And in that moment, everyone watching, from Lagos to Ouagadougou to Washington, felt the same chill. This was no longer just a confrontation. It was a reckoning. Excuse me, a voice said softly from the audience. It was a man, tall, thin, maybe in his late 50s. His hands shook as he held up a tattered ID card. This belonged to my son. Traoré turned to him. Would you like to speak? The man nodded and walked slowly to the mic set up for the audience. My boy's name was Musa. He was 17, top of his class, wanted to be a doctor, but he was arrested one night. They said he was part of a gang. He wasn't. They tortured him for 3 days. His body came back in a bag. He turned to Tinubu. I begged your office for help. I waited outside for 4 days. They told me you were in London. I just wanted answers. Instead, I got silence. Tears rolled freely down his cheeks. The entire room was still. Traoré stepped down from the stage and hugged the man. That simple act, unscripted, raw, human, sent shockwaves through the world. It wasn't just politics anymore. It was grief. It was love. It was pain made public. And Tinubu, still frozen in his seat, seemed smaller than ever before. The studio lights shimmered. The world was still watching. From the front row, a young girl stood. Her face was partly covered with a scarf, but the burned scars on her arms told their own story. Her voice was barely louder than a whisper. My name is Zainab. I was 12 when the school was attacked. Everyone turned. She stepped toward the mic, slowly, trembling. We heard gunshots. They told us to hide, but the men came anyway. They poured fuel. I don't remember much, only the fire and screams. The studio had gone completely silent. Traoré's jaw tightened. He walked to her gently, kneeling so they were eye to eye. You're safe now, he said, and the world sees you. Zainab held out a piece of cloth, all that remained of her school uniform. They said government soldiers would come. They never did. Then she looked Tinubu dead in the eye. You didn't save us. The host broke down crying. Even viewers around the world posted comments filled with tears, emojis, and rage. Zainab's voice, soft, broken, cut deeper than any weapon, and there were still truths left to uncover. Traoré returned to his seat, but now the entire room felt different. The pain was no longer distant. It was personal, alive. He leaned forward and tapped his tablet. Another document appeared on the giant LED screen behind them, this time showing a transfer of $45 million from Nigeria's National Education Fund, straight into a private offshore account. The money meant to rebuild schools, Traoré said softly, was moved here. This company, Emerald City Holdings, is owned by your cousin. Gasps echoed again. Tinubu opened his mouth, but closed it just as fast. His hands now gripped the edge of the table like he was holding on for balance. Traoré continued. You told the world that rebuilding after terror takes time. But this shows it only takes a signature and greed. He turned to the audience, speaking directly to every mother, father, and child watching. You trusted leaders to protect your future, but they were busy protecting their wallets. Zainab was still standing, her eyes wet but locked on the screen. This wasn't just shame. It was betrayal written in bold text, with receipts, and Tinubu had none to defend himself. A journalist in the studio audience stood up. "President Tinubu," he said boldly, "after the Guosa massacre, why did you take 3 weeks to visit the site?" Tinubu's voice, weak and raspy now, answered, We were coordinating relief efforts." Traoré looked at him with sorrow more than anger. "You were in Dubai," he said, "at a luxury resort, while bodies were still being pulled from the rubble." He tapped his tablet again. A photo appeared, Tinubu smiling at a 5-star rooftop event, dated 3 days after the Guosa killings. More gasps. "I was in Guosa," Traoré added, "with my men, carrying the wounded, burying the children." One of the anchors began to sob quietly. The screen cut to a satellite image of shallow graves. Hundreds. "Where were you?" Traoré asked. Tinubu looked down. No words came, and the silence felt like a confession. Zainab sat back down, trembling. In the live-stream chat, comments exploded. "I'm crying. How could they let this happen? Captain Traoré is our voice." And still, the most shocking document had not been shown. The one that would change everything. Traoré tapped the tablet one last time. A voice recording began to play across the studio speakers. It was muffled at first, then clear. A male voice. Confident. Cold. "Let the conflict drag on. The more unstable the North stays, the more international aid we control." Gasps broke out instantly. Tinubu's head shot up. "Forget those kids. Stabilizing that region doesn't win elections. Delay the army. Let the crisis cook." The anchor covered her mouth. One of the cameramen whispered, "No, no way." Traoré looked directly at Tinubu. "That voice is your Minister of Internal Affairs. This was sent anonymously from within your own government." Tinubu's eyes turned wide with disbelief. "And here's the kicker," Traoré added. "You responded to this message with 2 words." He tapped the screen again. The second voice, familiar, grave, said, "Understood. Proceed." The silence was brutal. It wasn't just a scandal anymore. It was premeditated pain. Millions of viewers exploded online. How could they? This is evil. I can't stop crying. Zainab covered her ears, and even Tinubu's bodyguards looked shaken. Traoré took a long breath and stepped toward the center of the stage. "I want to tell you about a boy named Sidi," he said. "He was 6. The screen changed again, this time to a photo. A little boy, barefoot, standing in front of a burned-down hut, holding a wooden stick like a rifle. "I met him in Yaga," Traoré said, voice trembling slightly. His father had been shot, his sister taken, his school was gone. So he carved a stick into the shape of a gun. Told me he wanted to fight back." Traoré looked away briefly, eyes wet. "I told him he didn't have to fight, that leaders would protect him." He smiled. But later that night, he was killed. A choked sob echoed from the audience. Traoré showed the stick, now wrapped in a white cloth. "I kept this, because I promised him I would speak his name to the world." He placed the stick gently on the desk between him and Tinubu. "You let him die," he said quietly. "And thousands more like him." Even Tinubu didn't look up, and every viewer, young or old, was now crying. Something in Tinubu broke. His shoulders slumped. He looked pale. He didn't defend himself. He didn't deny. For the first time, his eyes looked empty. The host cleared his throat, but his voice cracked. "Mr. President, do you have anything to say?" Tinubu whispered, barely audible. "I did what they all did. I just played the game." Traoré shook his head slowly. "That's the problem. It's never been a game. He turned to the camera. To every African child watching, your pain is not invisible. Your life is not cheap. You deserve leaders who fight for you, not over you. The audience stood, not for applause, but because they couldn't sit anymore. Zainab reached for her scarf. She wiped her tears. She wasn't afraid anymore. Even the studio crew, the ones behind the cameras, were crying. Traoré stepped forward once more, his voice firm but full of emotion. We don't need more speeches. We need justice. We need leaders who serve with truth. And if I must lose friends, favors, or fame to speak it, so be it. Then he looked at Tinubu and said the final words of the night. Your silence murdered hope, but our voices will rebuild it. The silence stretched like a thread ready to snap. Captain Traoré looked around the room, eyes swollen with tears. No one moved. No one blinked. Then something unexpected happened. The studio audience slowly stood up, not to clap, but in grief, solidarity, protest. One by one they rose. Zainab, the father from Gussa, the girl with burn scar, even the cameraman. A moment of truth. And then, Tinubu lowered his head. I didn't mean to lose control, he said quietly. But I did, and people suffered. It was the closest thing to a confession the world would ever hear. A producer whispered into the host's earpiece. Phones across Africa are crashing. The stream's overloaded. Millions are watching. But no one cared about the numbers. Traoré turned toward Tinubu one final time. This isn't just about you. It's about the future. About rebuilding what you broke and healing what you ignored. The camera zoomed in as he added, I'm not here for applause. I'm here for justice. The audience didn't cheer. They cried. And for the first time, the pain of a continent felt heard. Suddenly, Traoré's phone buzzed in his pocket. He checked the screen. It was a live video call from a camp in Burkina Faso. Displaced families. Children with dust on their faces and light in their eyes. One of his officers had set it up. He turned the screen toward the cameras. On the other end, hundreds of children waved, smiling. Some held handmade signs. Merci, Capitaine. Don't stop speaking. Africa is listening. Zainab wiped her eyes again. Traoré knelt and spoke gently into the mic. My brothers and sisters in Burkina Faso, in Nigeria, in every corner of this continent, I see you. I fight for you. Even when the world tries to silence you, I never will. The camera panned across the children, many of whom had lost everything, yet still had hope. You are not forgotten, Traoré added. You are the future, and the future will not be stolen again. One child whispered into the mic, We love you, Captain. That broke everyone. The chat exploded with, This is the most powerful thing I've ever watched. Africa needs more leaders like him. Even in their sorrow, they smiled, because truth had finally won. By dawn, the video had already broken the internet. Newspapers screamed, Traoré's live takedown changes everything. African youth erupt in support of truth. Tinubu faces global backlash after on-air silence. But it wasn't about headlines. It was about hearts. Across Africa, candlelight vigils appeared in towns and cities. From Lagos to Ouagadougou, people gathered in silence, holding photos of the lost, the forgotten, the brave. And one by one, people started speaking out. Former soldiers, mothers, teachers, whistleblowers. Inspired by Traoré's courage, they finally broke their silence. In the studio, the host, his eyes red, turned to the camera. This interview was supposed to last 30 minutes. It became a moment that history will never forget. Traoré stood beside him, holding the blood-stained drawing, the boy's wooden stick, and Amina's letter. This is not the end, he said. This is the beginning. If you felt something, If your heart broke like mine did, don't just scroll away. Tap that like button. Let the world know this story matters. Leave a comment. Speak the truth. Cry if you must, but let it out. And if you believe in real change, in honest leadership, then hit subscribe, because we're just getting started, and your voice is needed now more than ever.